The bright side of addiction is recovery, and recovery is an American way of life. If you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or simply want to find out more about the recovery community, or maybe you're a bit concerned about someone you know or love, this is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent podcasts have included interviews with Macklemore, actor John Larroquette, Hollywood Henderson, and many more. Welcome to episode 56 of Recovery Coast to Coast. Today we're going to the moon and back with the second man to actually walk on the moon, an American icon, astronaut Buzz Aldrin. He not only walked on the surface of the moon, but he returned to Earth and found long-term recovery. He's an amazing man, an amazing story of overcoming many obstacles and fighting hard for his recovery. Here's a quick clip from that interview.
Well, without a doubt, it's the fellowship and the long-standing friendships that I've built up. I'm a completely different person now than I was back in the Air Force days and at MIT in the space program, then trying to re-enter the Air Force after the space program. I just have a clear-headedness, a confidence. I'm not scared of situations and people. I can't say that I'm immune from discouragement. I still feel quite sensitive to things of significance that I'm involved in.
We will also hear an inspiring story of a magical 11-year recovery from a pretty amazing woman. Her addiction took her from the depths of despair to the heights of recovery. Here's a quick clip from that interview.
Desperation was a gift for me. I got so desperate and hopeless that I didn't see any way out, and because I'd had some previous recovery in 97, I knew that there was another way. Finally, again in 2010, I reached that point again. You know, there were so many times that I swore I would never use again, and then I used again. And I just got to this place. I was again homeless, hopeless, destitute, desperate, living a life of degradation, and I knew that there was some place that I could go.
Interviews with Buzz Aldrin and Elizabeth Patterson coming right up. And a little later, some inspirational words about going from darkness to light from a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and a founding member of the Eagles, the great Joe Walsh. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, and first of all, let me express my profound gratitude to you for listening to our podcast. I realize your time is important, and there are many choices you have. There are many podcasts out there. Thank you for listening to ours. Our website, recoverycoasttocoast.org. Following 15 years of nightly broadcasts on iHeartRadio in Seattle, our podcast, our national podcast, features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy our podcast, and please share it with your friends. Recovery is an American way of life. A reminder, if you'd like to get in touch with us, our email address is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast, supported by Sundown and Branch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs in America. Now going on 56 years of treating adults, adolescents, and families. Pretty damn impressive. They just celebrated their 55th anniversary. They are a not-for-profit organization that is not focused on making money, but saving lives and helping individuals find a path to long-term recovery. Does everyone need treatment for addiction? Absolutely not. I've known many people who simply went into the rooms and are enjoying the fruits of the recovery life. I've known others who followed the path of faith, and even some, a very few, who were just able to stop on their own. Very rare. I don't recommend trying it. But the vast majority do need some medical intervention for their disease. They need an inpatient facility that puts the patient first, that provides the tools necessary for long-term recovery. And one of the best ones around is Sundown M Ranch, just outside of Seattle in Washington State. They take pride in assisting individuals and family members through a very difficult and challenging process. They do that with compassion, respect, and utmost confidentiality. They've treated some 200,000 individuals and helped them find a way into a better life, a life highlighted by recovery. Now, the Sundown philosophy of treatment, pretty simple. 3 main objectives: A, arrest the disease; B, provide the needed support in the recovery process; and C, help guide the individual back to a healthy and productive life. Treatment at Sundown, abstinence-based, 12-step centered, and covered by most insurance, and their rates are among the lowest in the country. When you're looking for a treatment center, please put Sundown in the mix. Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins. Find out more by going to sundown.org. I invite you to join me for a cup of coffee and a conversation with an American icon. Buzz Aldrin was the second man to walk on the moon back on July 20th, 1969. I first met Buzz back in 1976 when I was helping to produce Operation Understanding, when 52 prominent men and women came together in Washington, D.C. to lift the veil of secrecy and deal a significant blow to the stigma attached to addictive disease. Recovery for Buzz was not easy. He tripped, he stumbled, he fell, even drank while on Antabuse. Finally, he was able to find his way into long-term recovery. He's been an inspiration to many, and hopefully that will include you. Let's listen to my conversation with Buzz Aldrin.
We are joined by a true American hero. On July 20th, 1969, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong landed their lunar module on the moon, and they became the first people to walk on the moon. Buzz Aldrin has been in recovery a long time. He has been very, very active. I first met Buzz back in 1976 when I was involved in a program called Operation Understanding with the National Council on Alcoholism, where 52 prominent people stood up without shame and said, "I am a recovered alcoholic." Buzz Aldrin has a book out. It is called Magnificent Desolation. It's a fascinating book, and there's a lot about his recovery in there as well. Buzz, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
Well, Neil, I'm real happy to join all of your listeners.
Buzz, let's go back to 1976 and Operation Understanding. What are your recollections of that historic event?
Well, I have put it on my slide for my presentation that I give to most people when I'm asked to speak. And, of course, there's some very recognizable people there, especially Dick Van Dyke.
Sure.
You can't miss his face in a crowd. I can kind of get lost in a crowd here and there unless people know I'm going to be there. I've written Return to Earth back in 73, 74, an autobiography that of course didn't deal with alcoholism.
Right.
Because I didn't think that was my problem. I thought I inherited depression from my mother's side of the family.
When we let people know that you're going to be on the radio show, Buzz, we invited our listeners to send in some email questions for you. So I'd like to begin and try to get a few of them in as best we can. I don't want to keep you because I know your time is limited. We start with an email from Sandra down in Atlanta, Georgia. She says, "How long did it take you to get sober? Were there many relapses? And what is your sobriety birthday?"
October 25th, coming up, I'll have 31 years. It was not an immediate fix. It took a good while. I don't know. I jokingly have referred to having maybe 13 30-day chips, but I know that I did have a year's sobriety after going through the Long Beach Navy alcoholism treatment facility. I lost my sobriety shortly after that. Some of the exact dates are, as you might think, a little hazy back there, but that's not really, it was not a real easy, straight-ahead task. And I believe that I even lost my sobriety after that Operation Understanding that you're referring to. I wouldn't say in retrospect that it was too early for me to have participated in that. I don't regret that in the least. I remember while I was at Long Beach, I was on Antabuse, and I took a weekend vacation about in the middle of my time there, and I started drinking again, and that's not too pleasant when you get all flushed over and red-faced and everything, drinking alcohol after you've been taking Antabuse. I've had a number of people early come up, well, not a number, a few isolated, come up and say, I've seen a lot of people in AA, and you're just not going to make it. And I think they may say that out of, I don't know, some feeling of superiority and feeling that people who are of world note or celebrities, as we might call them, they do have more difficult time because they've been treated specially by the general public.
Buzz Aldrin joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast book out. It's a wonderful book. I certainly encourage you to pick it up. There's a lot about his recovery, his alcoholism and his recovery. Magnificent Desolation is the name of the book, Long Journey Home from the Moon. Question from Portland, Maine. Jan writes, what has been the highlight of your recovery, Buzz?
Well, without a doubt, it's the fellowship and the long-standing friendships that I built up. I'm a completely different person now than I was back in the Air Force days and at MIT in the space program, then trying to re-enter the Air Force after the space program. I just have a clear-headedness, a confidence. I'm not scared of situations and people. I can't say that I'm immune from discouragement. I still feel quite sensitive to things of significance that I'm involved in that aren't going my way, because I still feel that my way is pretty good these days, and it certainly wasn't so good at all during my descent into, well, you could call it desolation. I certainly reached a magnificent apex in my career, and descended down into fearful discouragement. And I wouldn't say that I'm magnificent again, but I'm certainly a much more capable person, and I'm embarking on what I think are magnificent standards of opportunity for our nation and the world in historic potential, settling people on another planet in our solar system. That's a big deal, and I'm involved in that, and it's my capabilities that have improved significantly to be able to carry out some of these things confidently.
The book is by Buzz Aldrin, Magnificent Desolation, The Long Journey Home from the Moon. It's a great book. I encourage you to pick it up. We're visiting with Buzz Aldrin on Recovery Coast to Coast. We have some email questions, one from John T. in Butte, Montana. John writes, as a recovering alcoholic, do you still struggle with depression? And was the depression because of the drinking?
Yes, I do, but not very deep and not very long, because I am very conscious of obligations, and it just doesn't make me feel good at all to be able to sort of cop out, even though the demands that are placed on me are pretty high, and I can't do everything that people would like for me to do. I have to be kind of choosy. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't recover right away. I had the concern about depression and was on lithium for bipolar. Mm-hmm. I certainly think that there are periods when I'm maybe tempted to be overly optimistic about what I'm doing, and I try and guard against that fringes of manic behavior, and certainly I do know that I get discouraged because of the outward events, and it can be feeding on itself if I allow it to do that.
Gil from Natick, Massachusetts, what was the reaction of your fellow astronauts, including Neil Armstrong, about your alcoholism and your ongoing recovery?
Very, very quiet.
Mm.
During my recovery, I did have a sponsor, and I was invited to some event in Lyon, France. So I took my sponsor with me, and I think it really surprised a number of people that I showed up there, because they obviously had heard that I wasn't doing too well.
Buzz Aldrin's been joining us in Recovery Coast to Coast, the book called Magnificent Desolation. It's a great book. I invite you to pick it up. There's a lot about his alcoholism and his recovery, but more about the life of an amazing American hero, Buzz Aldrin, the long journey home from the moon. Buzz, I want to thank you for your time in Recovery Coast to Coast and wish you continued success one day at a time.
Okay, look forward to seeing you again, Neil. Thank you very much.
From 13 30-day chips to long-term recovery, he kept at it. Buzz Aldrin is living proof that recovery is the bright side of addiction. From Buzz Aldrin's story of redemption and recovery, we're now going to switch gears and hear from Elizabeth Patterson, a woman that I met down in San Antonio, Texas. Her dad died of alcoholism, and she started on the path of addiction very young. She lived to use, and she used to live. She also wanted to matter, but always felt that she had a hole in her soul. Let's listen to my conversation with Elizabeth Patterson. Welcome back to Recovery Coast to Coast. We are down here in Texas, beautiful San Antonio, Texas, at the Hill Country Hyatt Resort, the 47th Annual Conference for TAP, the Texas Association of Addiction Treatment Professionals. It's a great organization and a spectacular conference. They've had more registrants this year than they have ever had before. It's great. And I like coming down here because I'm always running into old friends. I've been coming down here and emceeing the program for probably 8-9 years, but always meeting new friends as well, such as Elizabeth Patterson. And she is with a number of programs, contemporary teaching, and West Park Springs. We'll find out about that. We'll find out about her as well. Elizabeth, welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast.
Thank you so much. It's quite an honor to be here and asked to share a little bit about my story and some of the organizations that I work with.
How long have you been in recovery?
I have been in recovery for 11 years. I just celebrated 11 years on August 2nd.
Wow, that's a lot of 1 days at a time.
It absolutely is.
How difficult did it get for Elizabeth in the drinking and using years, and what led you to not just the bottom, but the beginning of the recovery miracle? So
I started using at a very, very early age, before I was 15. By the time I was 15, I was into some really, really heavy drugs. I lived to use and used to live. Came from a family history of substance use and alcohol. Had many, many relapses, had been in quite a number of treatment facilities over the years. The bottom line to my story is that I always wanted to matter. I never felt like I mattered growing up because I was in such a dysfunctional family. So I was always seeking that, just finding that one person, place, or thing that would make me feel as if I mattered.
Where'd you grow up?
San Antonio, Texas.
Ah, okay.
San Antonio's been my hometown. I moved to Houston, Texas in '82. So.
You mentioned dysfunctional family. Tell me about your family.
My parents divorced when I was 2. My father was a major in the Air Force, had a perfect military record. He was at Fort Sam Houston in Lackland.
Oh, Lackland.
Lackland
okay,
Air
yes.
Force Base.
Yeah, I went through basic at Lackland. Yeah,
yes.
I know about Lackland.
I had all my medical stuff at Lackland and Fort Sam Houston.
Oh, my goodness.
As a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my parents divorced when I was 2. My father actually died of alcoholism when I was 12 years old. He had a perfect military record, except for one comment that said Mr. Patterson, Major Patterson, may have a drinking problem. Yeah. So basically lived with my mother most of those years and then left home at 15.
Did your dad ever find recovery?
He never, ever did.
Gosh.
No, it was very unfortunate. And then mother had a stroke actually sitting on a bar stool at a little place she frequented in San Antonio.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so
Okay,
yeah.
so Elizabeth is 15, and then you're continuing to use and get in trouble, I would assume.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's really funny that I never picked up any kind of drug charges. I did have other charges, theft and things like that, to subside to make up for my addiction, to carry my addiction through. Yeah, very involved in some deep, dark places. My addiction kept me in places longer than I ever wanted to stay and made me do things I dreamed I'd never do.
Oh my goodness. And when did it come to a crashing halt?
So I am a mother of 3 children. Was not able to be present in their lives due to my addiction. 1997, I found recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous and some treatment facilities in Houston. Stayed sober for 5.5 years, still wandering around with that feeling of loss of self-worth and all of that.
The hole in the soul.
Yes, I was actually at a place and I had to do a speech for, similar to drug court. However, it was a program in state jail. And I wrote something and I said there was a hole in my soul so big you could hear the wind blowing through it.
Oh my goodness. Wow. How did you wind up getting into treatment? What were the events that surrounded that? Did someone say you've got to go to treatment? Did the court say you have to go? What brought you to the steps?
Let me tell you, I received what I called, and we call in in the Narcotic Anonymous Fellowship, the gift of desperation. Desperation was a gift for me. I got so desperate and hopeless that I didn't see any way out, and because I'd had some previous recovery in 97, I knew that there was another way. Finally, again, in 2010, I reached that point again. There were so many times that I swore I would never use again, and then I used again. And I just got to this place. I was again homeless, hopeless, destitute, desperate, living a life of degradation. And I knew that there was some place that I could go. And I went back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then from there, I went into Narcotics Anonymous, which is the fellowship that I live by today. And have been doing that since 2010.
What does recovery mean to you, Elizabeth?
Wow. Recovery means an absolute change in my ideas and attitudes. I had to have a spiritual change. I had to find a power greater than myself, which at that time, in the beginning, was my sponsor. It was the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, the rooms of AA, people that had my predecessors. They were a power greater than me. And since then, I've been able to build a relationship, a spiritual relationship with a power greater than me that I call God.
They were able to love you until you could love yourself.
Absolutely, and they did so. I went to, I'll mention this quickly, Mercy Street is a church in Houston, Texas. It's affiliate of Chapelwood United Methodist. Those people have known me since 1997, and they have loved me through every one of my relapses. They supported me. Not once did they ever, ask me any, like, why did you, have you had enough? Or they never asked me that. They just loved me. And so absolutely many people have loved me until I could love myself.
Wow. What happened with the relapses, and what is different now that you're on a different path to recovery?
The funny thing they talk about it is that in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about we could not bring to mind with sufficient force the remorse and hopelessness of the previous days, week, month ago. And I think that's what it was like for me. I forgot the horrors of my addiction. Drugs or alcohol would appear, and I'd be like, oh, okay. And I forgot the hopelessness that brought me to my knees. So, and that's what's different now. I got in the boat, in the middle of the boat. I wasn't leaning towards the edge of the boat. I got in the middle of the boat, and I did the things that were suggested. 90 meetings in 90 days. Call my sponsor when I didn't know, which was every day because I was very unsure of myself and the way to live life. I have been given a life worth living.
How did you find a sponsor?
So, sponsorship, well, there's a pamphlet that talks about sponsorship in Narcotics Anonymous, and I read a little bit on that. I found a woman in recovery that I wanted what she had, right? She was sober clean for a long, long time. She actively was working a program. She was always in meetings. She has a sponsor that has a sponsor. And that is who I picked. And she was a little tough. And I
Good.
needed somebody that was tough. Somebody to tell me, if you will, how the cow ate the cabbage. The truth. She told me the truth. Even when I didn't like it, I listened, because I knew that she was living a life free from active addiction, and that she had the answers.
The bright side of addiction is recovery.
It absolutely is. It's the golden gate, right? You cross through that gate. It's the golden gate, and it's got the golden keys.
And it is a gift, but it's a gift that you need to take care of.
Yes, and I do that on a daily basis. That's another reason I'm sitting here at this convention, networking with so many other professionals that are in the field of addiction that can teach me. As a matter of fact, I ran into a couple of clinicians here that helped me in the very beginning of my recovery.
Wow.
So it's really powerful.
Tell me a little bit about your professional life.
All right, I'll be happy to do that. In 2013, I decided to go back to school. I had not been to school in 35 years. The disease of addiction just stole everything away from me.
Sure it did.
And so I started to go back to school in 2013, I believe it was, at Houston Community College. I did my LCDC, and then I finished my associate degree there. And I continued on in 2018 to 2020, getting my bachelor's degree in social work.
Good for you.
And I'm currently doing my master's, third semester, at University of Texas, Arlington. And I'm about to start my field placement at my place of employment, West Park Springs Behavioral Health. And I'm starting my field next week, where I'm doing the hands-on training as a master social work student.
Wow. It's been a long journey.
It has been a long, beautiful journey. I wouldn't have given up. I don't think I'd be where I am today if I hadn't have gone through the things that I'd gone through. It took every relapse to get me where I am today.
Yeah.
They
talk about programs of relapse prevention.
Yes.
I don't like to use that term. I like to use the term recovery enhancement.
Yes.
Tell me how your recovery is better today than it was yesterday, and how it'll be better tomorrow than it is today. Recovery enhancement. It just seems such a better way to put it, because a lot of people think about relapse, and yes, it's a relapsing disease. We know that. But a lot of folks feel like, well, I can go out and do a little more research. You may have another drunk in you, but you may not have another recovery in you.
That is so true.
And so it's terribly important that we put the emphasis on recovery today, recovery moving forward, and making it better, because as you've told me in this short interview, the progress that you have made since you have been in long-term recovery. That's a miracle.
It is a miracle. It is a miracle. And I am a miracle, from my history. So I think recovery enhancement is so important. It is about learning more about myself, digging deeper, getting to the core causes and conditions, looking deep inside myself, finding my character defects, and of course not creating more character defects by living in spiritual principles. Honesty, hope, faith, integrity, discipline, all of those things. And I try to enhance those on a daily basis. One of the ways that I do that is I do a regular 10th step, right? I've worked my steps with my sponsor a couple of times. I continually, 1, 2, 3, powerless, unmanageable, came to believe that something power greater than myself can restore me, and made that decision, to turn my will and my life over, my thoughts and my actions. And so steps 1 through 3 help me stay focused that I do have a disease and that I need help, and there's something out there that can help me.
When people get in recovery, it's not, the greatest thing in the world, and it doesn't mean that things are not going to happen, because shit happens.
Yes, it
What
does.
what happens to you? How do you deal with it when stuff happens?
So a very good example, I trust the process. And but what I mean by that is I allow the people in my life that I have harmed to have their process, right? When stuff happens. An example of that is that I wasn't able to meet my grandchildren for the first 3 years of their life, because I had just abandoned everything I had ever loved. And my son didn't trust me. And what I know is that he was being a good father by not allowing me back in those girls' lives for me just to disappear like I did on him. And so, when the stuff hits the fan, I pray, I meditate, mindfulness based type of things really help me. Meditation, music, sitting still, being quiet with my thoughts. As I said, prayer is an absolute very important part of my life. I don't necessarily pray for things to come into my life. I pray for God's will in my life.
And gratitude for the things you have.
Absolutely, lots of gratitude. I have gratitude every day. I'm so grateful when I get to climb in my bed at night, because for a long time I didn't have a bed, right?
Yeah.
And just the peace of mind and peace of my spirit, is healing. It's opening up.
How's your relationship now with your family?
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. My relationship now is beautiful with my family. I get to participate in my grandchildren's lives on a regular basis. I have a grandson. He's 4 months old.
Wow.
My little grandchildren, Nana, they call me Nana. They just love me. It's really, really good. And, through working the steps and, making a living amends, not participating in those behaviors anymore. Like I said, not living in character defects, but acting in spiritual principles.
What do you say to some woman who's listening to this broadcast who may be where you were 10, 15 years ago?
So I would love to say that there is hope, and I am actually living proof of that, and that you never have to use again, even if you want to. Our promise is freedom from active addiction, that any addict can stop using drugs, alcohol, can stop using, and find a new way to live.
Nana, Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for asking. It was an honor being able to share it, and it was very much of a pleasure meeting you.
Great. Nice meeting you as well. I hope you've enjoyed the conversations with both Buzz Aldrin and Elizabeth Patterson about their adventure in personal renewal. And by the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you would like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path you've chosen, as long as you have been in continuous recovery for a year or more, drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Coming up next, Joe Walsh shares thoughts on success, on active addiction, and positive recovery as he seeks to become a light in the darkness. We'll do that in just 30 seconds.
Alcohol is running your life. You want help, but can't take time away from work to get it. Where do you turn? Contact Sundown M Ranch. Sundown M Ranch outpatient programs have helped thousands recover from addiction without losing time on the job. Nationally recognized for innovative, effective, and affordable treatment programs, Sundown M Ranch will help you put your life back on track. Go to www.sundown.org to learn more.
Now, as promised, here's Joe Walsh, founding member of the Eagles and a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, with some thoughts that he shared recently at a treatment program about his addiction and his recovery.
I was in trouble. When you get successful at something and you're young, it's easy to lose your perspective. It's easy to forget what you were doing that got you successful. And that happened to me. And I started experimenting with alcohol and drugs, and I got dependent on alcohol and drugs. And very slowly, alcohol and drugs will convince you that you can't do anything without it. And that's what had happened to me. I could still function, but I knew I was in trouble. And alcohol and drugs were eating a hole where my heart was, and where my family was, and where love was, and caring about anything was. Alcohol and drugs was eating away at that. I want to leave a message for people who might have a problem themselves, that there is life after that, and it's good, and you can get there. And here's what you have to do. You have to ask for help. I've been there, and it's so hard, but maybe I can just be a light in the darkness for you to know that there is hope. It can be done, and life is so good afterwards once you get yourself back. All right? So, thank you so much for my life and my family, and I wish you all the best for yours. God bless us all, and thank you.
An amazing musician and an even more amazing man. I met Joe Walsh a number of years ago at a giant rally for recovery back in Washington, D.C. I love that guy. Well, that wraps up this edition of the National Podcast, Recovery Coast to Coast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please share it with others via social media or simply by telling someone about it. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. If you'd like to get in touch, again, our email, recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, here's a 24-hour national helpline that offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. Spanish-speaking individuals are available as well. 1-800-622-HELP. And join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the National Podcast. And another shout out to our sponsoring organization, Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott, reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.